She holds a doctorate in history from the University of Hawaii and a master's degree in South Asian studies, as well as an honors and master's degree in Urdu literature, very, very relevant for us today. Of course, Dr. Zehra's specialization is in intellectual history and South Asian literature. She rose to the position of principal of Lahore College for Women and later was principal of Government College for Women, Lahore. She's on the visiting faculty of numerous prestigious institutions and also served as a member of the Punjab Public Service Commission and Law and Justice Commission of Pakistan. She's been chairperson, National Commission on the Status of Women. So it's over to Professor Dr. Arfa Sayyeda Zehra to moderate this session.
Thank you so very much, though one should not have any courage to speak after such an introduction. But here I am only to moderate a session which is very important to all of us, but as the case it is in Pakistan, that when we talk about our mother tongues, we talk in English. So that simply explains so many hidden agendas already without saying anything about it. I have the honor and the great pleasure to have the panelists here. Zubaida Mustafa. She has written profusely on this topic, especially her book, Training of the Languages. Justice Wajiuddin Ahmad Sahib, and nobody, I think, knows that he doesn't need an introduction. Ray Brown, who works for British Council as an English language, ELT, basically, as a second language thing. And then Abbas Rashid, who has worked all his life for education and medium of instruction. A very paradoxical topic that we talk, and I hope it turns into a conflicting and controversial, so that we can have many questions to ask and many questions to be raised, that how and why a mother tongue is very essential, especially in the early years of life. We have heard only कि इक़बाल देर में आता है, but it's 30 minutes late कि आरिफा भी देर में आती हैं, so I don't know whether this session is going to be prolonged for another 30 minutes, and do we have 1 hour, or we shall be somewhere stopped that no, we have to move on to another one, because I know I have to go to another session after this. But I would like that we should have at least some very sensitive and profound discussion on this topic, which is resulting in the quality of education that we are suffering today. And I'll request all my panelists that please initiate to submit your thesis or discuss whatever your stand on it is for 10 minutes, so that they take 40 minutes and at least there are 20 minutes left for you to interact with them. And I promise you that I will keep as silent as possible. Thank you very much. To begin with, let me request Zubaida to start today's discourse. Are you okay? Okay.
Thank you, Arfa Zehra. And I think we follow on a very good session we already had on education. And this is in a way linked to that only, it's a continuation of that. I think before we even begin to talk about education or language, we should first of all be asking two questions. Our policy makers at least should have asked them before they made the policies. One is, what is the goal of education? The education we are trying to give our children, what do we aim to achieve from that? The second is, what do we aim to achieve from the language we use for education? I think I should make it clear that over here, although it says the medium of instruction in education, but I am referring mainly to primary education, the stage at which a small child enters the education system, and what is the language which should be used there, because we are still not very clear about that. I don't know if these questions have been asked. Sometimes I feel that they have not been, and that is why there's such a lot of confusion in our education system, in our language policies, and so on. But say if I were to answer the question, what do I would seek from the education system we have? I think first of all, the aim should be to help a child develop his mind and his thinking, the development, and his cognition. It is also important that through education, a child develops his potentials. It is important that critical thinking is inculcated in a child so that he can ultimately make out the difference between what is right and what is wrong. Then he should be able to imbibe ethical and social values from his education, and in short, he should become a good human being. And when I say a good human being, I don't mean he should be a good Muslim or a good Christian or a good Hindu. So long as he's a good human being, I'm very happy with that, whatever his religion. And of course, finally, we can't ignore I would say, the pragmatic compulsions of the day, that he should grow up to be a productive person, a productive member of society. So I presume these will broadly cover what the objective should be, although in the morning session, the previous session, we heard about all the ideological objectives which are put into education. But personally, I think if broadly these can be covered, they would achieve a lot. Now you come to education and you say that language, what do you aim to get from the language which you use, whether it's language A or B or C or whichever language. Now I think it should be a tool for communication, and that means that the child should be able to understand that language. He should be able to communicate with his teacher, the teacher should be able to communicate with the child. And you see how education is now envisaged to be. It is not even a one-way flow of information as it used to be some times ago, when the teacher just said whatever he or she wanted and the child was supposed to learn it up. Now it is supposed to be a participatory process. I call it supposed to be because it is not, but I think some schools are following it. Now, if a child wants to participate in the building up of knowledge, as it's called, so he must be taught in a language in which he can speak, in which he can express his ideas, and so that is why the importance of language, and I think it should be the mother tongue, because that is the language. And when I say mother tongue, you call it language one, or of course there might be a few exceptions, but it should be the language the child understands when he comes to school. And because the mother tongue is generally the language a child understands, that is why we say that education, especially in the early stages, should be in his mother tongue. Now, over here, we seem to have a lot of confusion, and I feel that this has really not been understood, and that is why our language policies have been so confused. And there are, schools adopting English. There are schools, I believe in the Punjab, the government schools have also been asked to teach in English, when the majority of the population does not understand the language. So when I speak about a language, I can just give you some, I would say, reason, some logical, ground why it should be the language of education and how it is important to even achieve the goals of education. Now, I would say there are three reasons, very broadly speaking. One is, of course, the biological reason. Nobody talks about the biological reason. Now, the biological reason is that a child starts acquiring language. We don't even say learning language, because it is a very natural process, and every child who is, of course, if it's a normal child, is going to learn how to speak, how to understand language, it will come very naturally to him. And the process is such that it starts right after birth. In the beginning, the child will not be speaking, but he is listening. We probably don't even realize it, but he is accumulating all the sounds, all the words, what are spoken around him. He's building up a reservoir in his mind, and then that is used when he starts speaking, he starts expressing himself, he starts asking for whatever he wants or expressing his own ideas. And as his mind grows, his brain grows, his language will also improve. In fact, the two of them, they work on each other. As the language improves, the cognition and the brain grows. As the brain grows, the language improves. So in this, when you start a child, when he goes to school, you must remember that whether it's at the age of 2 or 3 or 4, he has already been going through an education process. It's a very informal education. It's not sitting in the classroom. But you should not waste it. But it is, in a way, stopped. When you suddenly change the language at that stage, he has to learn a new language. He will become silent. There's the culture of silence. And in a way, you begin again, and it's not very logical to stop there. Instead, we should start building up from that stage, because obviously school education gives more focus, it gives a channel to education, and there are many more things he learns which he wouldn't if he were not to go to school. Now that is the biological reason. In Pakistan, we also have to think the educational reason, because what we have is the majority of the children, we should know that they are the first generation school goers. Their parents are, most of them, they are not educated, and quite a few, I think I would say a big majority, are not even literate. In fact, Bela Jamil's report should really come as an eye-opener to people. And now such a child who comes from that background, he is not going to get any assistance from his home or his family as far as his schoolwork goes. So the burden lies entirely with the teachers. So it is important that the language used is such that it is easy for the child, for the teacher, because the teacher is the other factor in Pakistan's education system. You see, our education has been on the decline for, I think, at least 4 or 5 decades. Now, what we have is, now that we have woken up to it, that the teachers are a product of this system, this decaying, decadent system, the system which has really fallen. So you can't really expect the teachers to be really perfect, who can teach. Of course, there are a few exceptions, and I don't speak of the private sector schools. I'm speaking of the vast majority, and the vast majority of the children are going to public sector school. The vast majority of the teachers are teaching in the public sector school. So what we have to do is to train the teachers, to teach them all the new methods of pedagogy, to teach them the subject content and even how to teach language. So I think it would be easier to train a teacher. She or he already has work to do, and at the same time should be putting in some training if the language issue is not brought in and made more difficult for him. If it is his or her own language, the language, because we presume that mostly in one place the same language is spoken. So the teachers can be trained more easily, they can pick up their training more easily if language used is their own language. And finally, I would just say that there's the social issue, because it is creating a kind of a divide, and I think I won't dwell on that, but we know what kind of divide is coming in. So thank you.
Thank you so very much, Zubeda. You reaffirm our belief that education is not only expression, it should be an experience. And until education is an experience, language will only remain a tool and will not make things, as you say, understandable or understandable for critical thinking. I have the honor now to request Justice Wajuddin Ahmed to let us know what does he think about that the mother tongue should be the medium of instruction. And I specify again, at least for the very early years of the education years. Justice Wajuddin Ahmed Sahib.
Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I probably am the only one amongst the speakers of this panel who was educated in a school in my own mother's tongue. And the consequences that I suffered will take a long time for me to recount. Suffice it to say that when I matriculated with Urdu as my medium of instruction and went to college, for 6 months, I didn't understand what was happening in the class. And then I had to work very hard. For years on end, I had to work very hard. And then gradually, I came into my own. So it is not easy. It is not easy for anyone to be educated in one's own mother tongue and then to switch on to something else. But that is something which in modern times one will have to do anyway. If you educate your children in their mother tongues, of which there are 20 and odd in Pakistan, and these people have to go for higher learning, worse will happen to them than what happened to me. We should thank our stars that we had the likes of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who realized that the English language was the language of the day. And already in 1857, we were belated by 100 years. The other population of India was 100 years ahead of us. Sir Syed realized it and introduced the modern English system of education in the subcontinent. And as a result, we were able to achieve our own homeland, that is Pakistan, in 1947. So this is no easy matter. This is a very serious matter. And the question of mother tongue is a very sensitive question. This is the question which led to the falling away of the eastern wing of Pakistan when the Quaid-e-Azam was ill-advised to say that the national language of Pakistan would be Urdu and Urdu alone. Now that kind of thing is very dangerous. So my own thinking is that while we can continue with the curriculum as it is, medium of instruction being in English, we can side by side train our youth in their own mother tongue also. And that is how we will be able to appeal to their geniuses. Now that is one aspect of the matter. The other aspect is that they say that if you don't educate your children in their mother tongue, then you fall behind, and then by way of example, Pakistan is cited. And Pakistan is compared to France, Germany, and Japan. And they say that, look here, the progress that those countries have made, it is only because the children there were always initiated in their own mother tongues. that may be so. But for Pakistan to switch back to the mother tongues is like operating as Sir Sayyid in reverse. That would be very dangerous. Insofar as France and Germany and the likes of them are concerned, they have never had any break. They have been continuing with their own languages without any break whatsoever. So this kind of experimentation with the nation's youth can, I think, should not be resorted to. And then understand one thing very clearly. You introduce the mother tongue all over Pakistan. Every child is educated in his own mother tongue. What would be the result? The result would be that these prime institutions, the likes of Grammar, HSN, Lawrence College, Godagari, which have turned out excellent people, would wither away. And what is more, the elitist classes would send their children abroad. They would be educated there abroad. And then they will come and rule, having been subjected to the highest quality of education. So instead of providing the same facilities to our students across the board, the facilities that they enjoy in Grammar or HSN or Lawrence College, Godagari, we should not make these prime institutions the kind of institutions that we have across the country. And you see, insofar as the language is concerned, the English language is concerned, it is one of the heritages of the British that we have. They gave us the railways, they gave us the canals, they gave us the hospital system, and they gave us the English language. Now that is something. Now, I will ask you a simple question. How many of us would have been here attending these erudite sessions if we were not educated in English? Hardly any. So you see, let us be very careful, let us not be emotional, let us try to understand that what these people do in Pakistan is that they say, look here, national language is very important, the provincial languages are very important, the local languages are very important. They are important. I am one who would be with a situation where not only Urdu should be the national language, but all the major languages spoken in Pakistan, Sindhi, Pashto, Gujarati, Balochi, Punjabi, Saraiki, every one of these languages should be given the status of national language. In every one of these languages, a child should be initiated. But for God's sake, do not do away with something which we have achieved during a period of incessant hard work, the English language. Don't do that. That is a very, very dangerous perspective. I can see it because I have borne it. I have suffered from it. And then let us understand that we are part of the Commonwealth. Mr. Bhutto in 1972 tried an experiment. We walked away of the Commonwealth. Many of you would remember the sufferings that we had on account of that withdrawal. Ultimately, Mr. Bhutto had to go back to the Commonwealth. This is where our roots are. And look at the other alternative. If you introduce the kind of system that goes on in the government schools, the kind of system that goes on in the rural areas, what kind of stuff are they producing? Do you want to have the madrasa type of education all over Pakistan? Do you want to have terrorists raising their heads at every nook and corner of the country? So please don't do it. This is a very, very dangerous exercise if we want to go into that. Mother tongue, yes. Provincial languages, yes. National language, yes. But don't do away with the English language. That is one of the things that we have inherited through a period which is not a happy one. No one was happy under the colonial rule, but then there are some benefits of that rule. Let us not give up those benefits.
Thank you so very much, Justice Retired Wajiuddin Ahmad Sahib. And your opinion must come as an order. And I am putting myself at the risk of not agreeing with it. Yes, there is this very good, valid argument that the elite should remain elite, rather they should become elitist, and the poor should remain poor, rather be poorest. Let it be in education. By promoting early education in mother tongue, nobody is denying the importance of English language, which is a language of communication throughout the world. But let's not politicize language. We have already once done it, and we have suffered in 1971. Let's keep language as the language should be, to clear the concepts. And to clear the concept of a child, you have to give him a familiar atmosphere, a familiar words, and then when a concept is clear, the child would be able to put any word, any expression to that experience. On a very lighter note, I would have loved to to tell you this anecdote in Punjabi, and then I'm doing the hard job of translating an anecdote into English. In an English medium class, and let me explain that regional language schools are not madrasa schools. Madrasa schools do not teach in mother tongues. They have only two tongues. One what they call a language of Sharia, and the other is the language of Saudi Arabia. They even do not talk about it. So in an English elementary class, the teacher wrote M on the blackboard. And she asked a pupil, a student, what is this letter is? And he went there and he said, M for mother. The teacher was so happy that the child is so understanding, so brilliant. Not only he understands the letter, but also has a concept of it, can have associations with it. And then she wrote on it, W. And she asked another student to come and tell her what that letter was. And that letter, W, that a student stood there for a few seconds, looked up, looked sideways, looked down, and she asked what it is. Well, he said, this is Rashid's mother, but in a yoga position, she has taken her leg upstairs. So let's not take the whole nation into a yoga position when we start moving our legs up. We have to walk our way very difficultly. If today the public education system is not good, and if only few elite education systems claim to be a good education institutions, let's try to build every education of standard. And that is the greatest challenge that we have. I'll request Mr. Ray Brown, who has much wider experience in English language teaching, to come and express, please.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. What I propose to do in the time allotted to me is to situate this discussion on a broader scale, first of all, on a worldwide scale. And then I want to explain what the the role of the British Council in this discussion has been over the past 2 or 3 years. I wish to begin with two snapshots from my own past. And I'm going to go back, first of all, to the late 1970s, to a country called Mali in West Africa. There it was around 1978, if I remember rightly. I was called one day to a meeting at the Ministry of Education, and those of us who were concerned with language teaching in general were there, and we were told that the ministry wished to implement a change of policy and that it was important to introduce teaching in one of the mother tongues in the early ages of education. The problem was that in Mali, which in terms of the official language is French. There is a vehicular language, which is an indigenous language called Bambara, which is spoken not by 100% of the people, but by a majority, and is also written. There are other languages which are indigenous languages. There are about 5 or 6. Most of them at that time were not written, except Tamashek, the language of the Tuaregs, which had its own alphabet. So there was the problem of devising an alphabet for the languages which didn't already have one, and the conventions of spelling. And of course, over the years that succeeded, there were problems of textbooks. There were problems, the most important problem of teacher training, something we'll come back to later, I think. Now, that adventure, which began in the late 70s, continued over the years, and at the moment there is what you might call a trilingual policy of mother tongue, Bambara, and French in operation. And nothing works perfectly, obviously, but at least it is working. Now that was in the 2 points to make about that. One is, it was in the late 1970s. It's 30 years ago. It's a generation ago. The second point is that it was an initiative from the Ministry of Education of the Republic of Mali. It was their initiative. The British Council had nothing to do with that. The British Council didn't even have an office in Bamako. Then I want, for my second snapshot, to jump ahead 20 years to a totally different environment in Latin America, in Colombia. A very similar thing happened. One day I receive an invitation to come to an important meeting at the Ministry of Education. This meeting is chaired by no one less than the principal secretary, the permanent secretary of the ministry. And we were only about 25 or 30 people. And she said, listen, we've got a problem. We need to solve this question of education in early years, because our Indian communities are being disadvantaged. In Colombia, there were several indigenous, not as many as in Bolivia, for example, where there's a majority of Indians, or Ecuador, or Peru. But in Colombia, there were pockets, sometimes quite sizable pockets, of Indian populations who the government decided needed to have at least their early education in their mother tongue. And of course, the same problem arises of textbooks, materials, teacher training, and associated matters. But again, the two important points. That again was in the 1990s, about 20 years ago, and it was an initiative of the Ministry of Education. I rather suspect that in both these cases, in fact, I'm not absolutely sure of this, but I think there was information or studies that came possibly through UNESCO, but I'm not absolutely sure about that. Now, let me get on now to trying to explain what the role of the British Council has been as regards the question of early education in the mother tongue in this country. In 2009, the British Council took an initiative which was to take some kind of measures to facilitate a discussion, a debate, like as we are having today, a debate about the role of the mother tongue in early education, and of course the role of Urdu and the role of English, which are associated. We're not going to dissociate these things. And this was a debate which began. We brought in a specialist in these matters called Coleman, Hywel Coleman, who produced a report, on a first report, and on the basis of this report, the British Council formed a panel of specialists, a panel of experts, if you like, to think of Pakistani experts, academics and others from the other fields such as journalism and teaching generally, to consider these issues, and that a second report would be issued according to what the panel of experts thought, and reflecting their views, and a consensus, if a consensus emerged. Now, the British Council's position in this was not to impose anything. It's very important to understand this, because sometimes people don't. It was to facilitate a dialogue. We called it a policy dialogue. There was a consensus, and the consensus was essentially that the research appears to show, with no doubt, with very little doubt, that there is better progress in all subjects subsequently if the child has the first 1 to 3 years of early education in the mother tongue. Now, there are reasons for that. One of the things is that when the child who has been brought up with the mother tongue at home moves to school and then has to learn in a language which is, in effect, a foreign language, the studies show that this creates certain psychological problems, especially in the formation of concepts at this early age, learning language and learning concepts at the same time, and that the acquisition of concepts and the development of thought is facilitated if it is done in the mother tongue. That doesn't mean that the rest is forgotten about, incidentally. I think that will come later in our discussion. And also that the child will acquire more confidence. There's another issue as well, of course. It's that surely it appears to me that there's a question of giving dignity to the child's mother tongue. This is the language that the child learnt at home. This is the language that the child learnt at home with its family, with his or her family, parents, siblings, etc. And surely there is something unjust about rejecting this in the school context. This has happened also, incidentally, in European countries with various dialects. I remember in looking at people, my wife is from France, and the dialect or the language, because it is actually a language, there's sometimes discussion about what is a dialect and a language, but there is a language in southern France in rural areas now called Occitan. And when 3 generations ago, or even 2 generations ago, they were not allowed to use that language at school. They had to use standard French. Right. So you're not giving dignity to the mother tongue in that case. So it is important to give dignity to the mother tongue. I'm now going to quickly tell you what the proposals of the second round of study on this matter by the panel of experts and Hywel Coleman were. I'll just give you the 2 main proposals. They are, number 1, that the mother tongue should be used as a medium of instruction for at least the first few years of education. It's left quite flexible, this can be further discussed. And the other important one, I think, is the national language Urdu and an international language, probably English, right? Let's be fair, it could be Chinese. Probably English, are introduced at points when the child is ready for them. And I'll add a third one, which is extremely important, that all languages are taught well, because this is a major problem. All languages are taught well by teachers who have been adequately prepared. We are having another meeting. We have called our panel together again in early March to have another meeting so that they can decide It's not up to the British Council to decide, so that the panel can decide what is the further action to take. What can be done now to bring this issue to some kind of conclusion, to have some kind of forward action? Thank you.
I'm very grateful to Mr. Ray Brown, and I'm reminded, and I will very proudly I will narrate that Sindh has taken the first step for their school children to learn Chinese. The Sindh province has done this first thing, so at least mother tongues are not, or regional languages are not that difficult, because it is said you need 10 years only to understand the basic of the Chinese language. I'll request now my colleague, friend, Mr. Abbas Rashid, who has done a lot of research, has been basically in the policy making and education management also, to express his views. Abbas Rashid, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I propose not to take very long on this because I think we're already running short of time. I just want to pick up on 2 or 3 points that I think earlier speakers have made very well. One is just to say from the outset that this whole issue of English, Urdu, Punjabi or Sindhi or mother tongue, please bear in mind this is not a zero-sum game. This is not an either-or proposition. I think the point has been repeated, but let me repeat this once more. We are talking here about the mother tongue as a medium of instruction at the primary level. It is not clear, and I think it will take more research to figure out how far within the ambit of primary education, how far up will the child have to go, and perhaps that will also depend on whether we are talking of children in the rural areas or the urban areas and so on. It is an extremely complex issue with no simple solutions. I'm grateful also to Justice Wajiduddin Saab for raising some important issues here. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the point he did make, perhaps indirectly, is the usefulness of English, and I think you were emphatic about that. And you would find that most parents in this country, everywhere, will agree with you in that that is the language of social mobility, it is the language of power. Parents want, obviously, for their child to be well versed in English in order to get ahead. And please bear in mind, at least speaking for myself and perhaps for most of the panelists, I think no one is contesting that. There is perhaps a role for Urdu in our urban centers, certainly. Many urban centers, Urdu has become. And I think let's also expand this a little. We are not just talking perhaps here of mother tongue. We are talking also of the child's perhaps home language, first language, any way you want to define what the child has really grown up with. So there is no reason to discount Urdu, perhaps also as a medium of integration. There has to be a lingua franca. We have to share some medium as citizens of one country in which we can communicate with each other. So it's a question of which language is appropriate at what stage of schooling. And please do not worry about the issue of transition. Language transition is a phenomenon that is common to most countries of the world, and it is not a problem. The issue with the mother tongue, if we can come back to why this is even an issue at all, is that I think as Zubaida pointed out, that this is something that the child brings from home. this has to do with the child's cognitive ability and the effort to build on that ability, so that what you're doing with the first language, with the mother tongue, is acquiring the ability to learn a language as well. It is not just learning a language, it's also learning the ability to learn languages, so that once that is done, it becomes easier to learn other languages, so that the issue is not, I mean, the earlier, the better proposition, I think, is a very mechanical one. You cannot, even if you wanted to, you cannot, for instance, have English becoming the medium of instruction for every child in this country. You can't even do it for 5%. But even if you could, it's not a good idea, because according to a number of experts, a child actually has a fairly sizable vocabulary in a given language, in the mother tongue, when he or she gets to school at the age of 5 or 6 years. It's something like around 3,000 words. And when you build on it, you're building that cognitive ability. You're making it easier for the child to become stronger in terms of conceptual understanding. So in a way, when we talk about is it this or that, I think that in itself is problematic, which is not to say that this is easy, but it is a real issue. I think if we are clear that it is an issue, we will find an approach, a policy, a strategy to crack it over time. But to dismiss it and to look for solutions that basically suggest that let's just opt for this particular language and sooner or later children will learn. Any number of reports that indicate very low levels of learning, and admittedly there are other reasons why learning is low, from the Bridges report to reports done by the World Bank to Acer to, I mean, there are any number of reports that indicate that the learning levels are low among children, and certainly when we look at our classroom observations, we find that language is a key issue. All languages almost are badly taught in the majority of the schools in this country, and one of the problems is certainly in our rural areas that children find right from the word go, and I'm not even talking about the politics of this or the cultural context. I'm just looking at it from a very narrow pedagogical lens, that this becomes one of the reasons why children find it difficult to learn. I think we're running short of time. Hopefully there's some time for a question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Abbas, for helping me, for leaving some time for question and answer. And I think at the most we can take, before I could say that how many questions we can take, the hands are still there. I think we cannot take more than 4 very short questions, no comments, no statements, please, just questions. The first were you, sir. 4 questions, 2 from this side, 2 from that side. The gentleman there at the back was the first one there, please. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I have not understood whether you mean mother's language or first language.
Mother
Talk
tongue.
of mother's language, I think we have got so many languages, Makrani, Gujarati, Kutchi, so many languages. Which language are you talking about?
Thank you. The second question from there, and who, I will ask the panelists who will take the questions also.
Well, as I am to avoid a comment, I would say that when you, Mr. Abbas, when you said that when we are talking of English as a medium of
Will you please hold it a little closer? Thank you.
You said that when we talk of English as a medium of instruction, we're talking about 5% of the education system. What about the 95%? And a subsidiary question to you and the panel at large. what are our languages lacking that we can't even give our people education up to BA and MA, given the state of our education? And that's about it. Thank you.
The first question about the multiplicity of the language, and the second question is about keeping 99% deprived. Abbas, would you like to, so please?
I'm actually suggesting first language, which is very often the mother tongue of the child. But since I'm not looking at this point at the cultural context, which is hugely important in itself, but only from the pedagogic point of view, I would go with the first language in terms of what the child is immersed in. And I just want to elucidate this point, that for a very small percentage of the elite, the first language is English simply because the child is immersed in a universe of English. The parents speak it, he or she has access to television, to games, to whatever, to peers, all of them. So it doesn't matter what the mother tongue was, literally, but the first language is English for that 5%, which takes me to the other question, what about the other 95%? That is why we are having this debate, and that is why there are no easy answers. All I'm saying is that for the other 95%, starting them off with English as a medium of instruction is not an option, period. That's why we have to think.
May I have a question from this side, please? The gentleman here, please, there, please. Will you please take the microphone there, please? Will you please take the microphone there?
Justice Wajihuddin, and agree with Madam Zubaida. And my question is, isn't it the problem that we are facing is that language is not being taught well, rather than what language is being taught? Actually, mother tongue is extremely important. If we do not teach mother tongue, how are the books going to be written in their mother tongue to be taught to the children? How is the literature is going to, go? So basically, our problem is that the language should be taught well, rather than what language should be taught.
Thank you. Would anybody would like to take this question to answer from that? I am very sorry, sir, I have to wrap it. I am the one person who had to be in another session at 5, and I am being not only reminded but reprimanded that I have to end this question. Justice Wajihuddin Sahib, would you like to answer to this question?
Your question was a multiple one. Can you kindly say this precisely? What is it that you want to know? Come up. Yes.
I wanted to comment basically that the problem is not that the children, what language the children should learn, whether it is Sindhi, Urdu or Punjabi. It should be mother tongue basically for the first 3-4 years. But it should be taught well. And if you're going to teach English, it has to be taught well, so that children who are starting English from, let's say, 3rd class, class 3, they should be taught so well that by the time they start the 12th standard, they should be able to understand.
That is obvious. Whatever language is taught, it has to be taught well. And of course, it is a question still open whether the mother tongue, the medium of instruction in the shape of mother tongue would stop at class 3 or would go on up to metric and even up to PhD level. These are questions which are still open.
It is my privilege, honored or rather a hurried duty, to thank very distinguished panelists here and to thank you all. I am sorry I have to run on the orders. Thank you so very much.